And hello, everybody. I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. State of Oregon, Idaho, Washington, California, parts of Montana burning up. Forest fires everywhere. Oregon's the worst, has the largest fire. Just smoke everywhere. People losing their property. A lot of timber that it could have values being burned up. We're going to talk about all that tonight with a gentleman who writes a lot about this. He knows a lot about this. I think you guys are going to learn a ton. I am learning a ton. I'm doing a series called The Truth About Timber. We're actually in season 2, and I just went back to Oregon and shot some. When you go out in the forest and you look at it from a forester's standpoint and a logger, you see things completely different. And you realize that right now we have courts and judges who don't know how the forest operates managing our forests. Now, yes, it's supposed to be the Forest Service and the BLM, but that's not what happens, because they come up with plans, environmentally proven plans to protect the forest and help grow more old growth forest. And then the very people who say they're trying to protect old growth come in, take the issue to court, get it held up in court, kill the sale. The sale would have thinned the timber out of there, gotten rid of some of the brush and things that are causing these fires. And instead of doing what they say they're doing, these anti-timber groups are destroying the very forest they say they're trying to protect. And the only people who can stop this is you and me, because they're called public forests for a reason. You and I own them. Timber companies don't own them. They have private lands. The environmentalists, alleged environmentalists, don't own them. They're part of the ownership, but they don't have all the say in this. So we need to start standing up and doing this. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you're educated about it. And that's what we're going to attempt to do tonight with this podcast. Our sponsors are Chris Dental Family Dentistry. Dr. Bratland believes in your voice. He also believes in we should be managing our forests as well. Albert Taylor, Endless Possibilities. They work with people in our communities with different abilities. They're a wonderful place. If you're looking for work, looking for something meaningful to do with your life, this is a great thing. New American Funding with Greg Hinkle, the Hinkle Lending Team. He's a mortgage broker here in Montana, also works with Idaho, Montana, Washington, Oregon. So if you're looking to move, he's your man. Montana Oral Surgeons and Dental Implant Centers. They have shops in Butte, in Helena, in Bozeman, and in Great Falls. Rains Heating and Air Conditioning in Cottage Grove, or actually Creswell. You need them right now. You guys have been having some hot weather just like us. Here in Montana, I think it was 94 over the weekend. Very, very, very horrible. And our last sponsor, Pat McCarl, New Leaf Hyperbarics and Wellness Center. If you've never done hyperbarics, you need to get in there. They also do light therapy. They do massage therapy. And a number of other therapies. Give him a call and find out more about what he's doing. All right, let's get our guest on here. Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, Rick, I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Okay, Bob, tell people, to start off with, tell people a little of your history, because I'm on a group chat. It's like an email that Bob puts out, and I get really educated from this thing. But there's a whole bunch of people on there, and scientists and experts in the forestry field. Kind of give people the Reader's Digest version of why you're so interested in this and what you've done.
Well, I'm old, and so the first part of my life, I spent 20-some years as a reforestation contractor, planting on old burns. And we didn't have catastrophic wildfires in those days. From the 52 to 87, there was one major fire in Western Oregon. There's trucks and cars and log trucks and people working, and we didn't have fire, a lot of protection. But then the spotted shut down. So I went back to Oregon State and I got my PhD in the study of catastrophic wildfire. Since the late 80s and early 90s, as you know, I've been corresponding with a lot of scientists at the national level, regional scientists, and very interested in the topic, not only of these catastrophic wildfires, which are preventable. We've shown how to do that, but mostly in interest in reforestation work. What are they doing after the fires? Who's going to work? Who's doing the work? What is the quality level? Are these forests being maintained? So a real strong interest in the future.
So, because, I remember growing up, my parents talked about the Tillamook burn, and that was like a catastrophic fire, and you never had those. And now, if you were like a 10-year-old child, you would think that this is normal, because this never used to happen. I remember as a news reporter, when you'd have fires in the summer, but it was not all the time, and rarely did you cover them 3 months out of the year. I mean, it was a rare occurrence, and now and I think people are starting to get sick of it.
I think if you're a 30-year-old man, you think that this is the same. This has been going on since '87. So anybody that's moved to Oregon or the Pacific Northwest since the late '80s has seen this. The Tillamook burn was in '33. It made international news because it was such a big deal. Newsreels, newspapers reported on it internationally. Then it burned again in '39. Then it burned again in '45. And then World War II ended, and we said, we've got to put an end to these fires. So the Tillamook burned again in '51. But by that time, they had fire breaks in, they salvaged it. And the last major fire was '52, Vincent Creek. But it was an extremely unusual occurrence. And then from '52, the next major fire was 1966, the Oxbow fire.
Yeah. At
the mouth of Smith River on federal land. And then the next one was 1987, the Silver Complex. And at the Silver Complex, at that time, the woods had shut down. I was back in school, and a team of graduate students, and we studied the Silver Complex, determined that what had to be done is the dead wood need to be moved out, the area to be harvested, and it need to be maintained. It would burn again. They didn't do that, so the Biscuit Fire in 2002 happened. The Klondike Fire and the Chetco Bar Fire in 2016, Klondike Fire in 2018, and it's like the Tillamook burn. They keep burning through this old fuel that's been created from these previous fires.
So, Bob, what changed? You said that up until '87, these things didn't happen, and then in the '90s and 2000s, it just got really bad. What was the major factor in the change?
Well, it really goes back to NEPA in December of 1969, and they started creating wilderness areas, and they started creating the Endangered Species Act, and then we had the Equal Access to Justice Act, which meant taxpayers had to pay nonprofit organizations to sue the government to stop logging. So a lot of the anti-logging lawsuits took place and were covered by taxpayers. That was in the late '80s. So the listing of the spotted owl in the '90s, followed by the marbled and the coho listings, just were, if you call a lawyer an ambulance chaser, these people were taking advantage of the Equal Access to Justice Act. Initially, that had been designed for poor people, small businesses, and retired military. But after a year or two in Congress, right before it was enacted, for some reason, they added nonprofits to it. So Sierra Club, Portland Audubon, those organizations began suing up the yin-yang. Dozens and dozens of suits are still going on, the same small groups of people using taxpayer dollars to shut down our woods, put people out of work, burn up our forests, and kill our wildlife. It's not doing what they claim they're doing. It's making money for a small group of nonprofits and their lawyers. That's it.
That's unbelievable. So we, the taxpayer, and timber companies and their employees were actually paying for these groups to sue us or sue the government and stop these timber sales. How do we stop that?
Well, we changed the law. We say, taxpayers are going to stop funding large corporations. We can continue funding small businesses and poor people, but this whole racket has been going on. The cost to taxpayers in the millions, but the cost to rural communities in our forests is the tens of billions of dollars. And the cost for wildlife, you've been out here, you know what it is. It's killing millions of wildlife. It's polluting. The smoke is killing people. Estimates are about 10,000 people a year are dying in the United States from wildfire smoke. So it's not just the direct action of the flames that are destroying small communities and the industries that used to support them. It's the smoke that's created as well.
Bob, what also blows me away is that they claim to want to protect our forests and our old growth when, okay, they already protected the old growth, because literally very little old growth on federal lands. No old growth is cut, so the old growth is not the problem, but they're actually endangering it because these forests are burning. And the biggest threat, and I got this from people in the environmental community, the biggest threat to old growth forests right now is fire. So they've created a situation where they're destroying the very thing 20 or 30 years ago they said they were trying to protect.
And I think the key word there is they said they were trying to protect. In the last 20 years on federal lands, the most recent information is 9,000 acres of old growth were logged in 20 years. About 200,000 acres were lost to bugs, and 700,000 acres burned. So these wilderness areas, roadless areas, riparian reserves, so-called critical habitat are all passively managed lands owned by the public that are being allowed to grow up into fuels and burn. And the story we've been told just isn't true, that they're protecting endangered species or they're saving the old growth. That's all PR. And it's amazing that this racket has been able to persist year after year, millions of forests burned up later, and it's still going on. They're still pulling the same tricks, and we're having the same results.
Bob, here's a real touchy one for people. What happens? This happens with everything. With homelessness, you create an industry. So now you've got people who are supposedly trying to get people not to be homeless anymore, yet that's their job. So they're not going to put themselves out of a job. And that's the same thing that's happened with firefighting, is you've got people working 9 to 5 and they get off the thing and they're walking off the job and you know, it's to their, and I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying if you have a fire and it starts burning, if it burns for a week, that's a job for a week. If it burns for a month, I mean, that the incentive is there to make this into a business. And I know that's really sensitive, and I love the firefighters that go out and fight this stuff, but that we have to talk about that because I mean, am I barking up the wrong tree?
No, it's the methods of fighting fires now. If you look at the worst fires in California's history, whether it's loss of life or acreage or volume of timber burnt, it all happened mostly happened under the watch of Moore, who's now head of the Forest Service and is calling for more watch it burn fires. We used to have a 10 a.m. rule, and the 10 a.m. rule said you worked right through the night and you got the fire out by 10 a.m. And we didn't have very many fires. We had the roads were open. Now we've got roadless areas. We had people paying taxes working in the woods. Now we have people being paid with taxpayer dollars watching fires burn. I think the budget of the Forest Service went from about 30% fighting wildfire to it's now 70 or 80% of their total income are these massive fires. So it's just like the homeless problem. Like you said, there's industries built up to encourage homeless people, but 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't have homeless people. So the more the industry builds up, the more homeless people we have. The more the industry builds up, the more wildfires we have. It's job security.
Well, and isn't what I was just recently out on a burn, and it was still smoldering, and a timber company came in, and the firefighters left the job at 4:30 or 5, and the fire was coming up this hill, and the ODF asked this timber company, "Can you guys bulldoze and create a fire line?" So they worked through the night and created this fire line. and stop the fire from going over the ridge. And then, yes, they had their selfish reasons. They had their timber on the other side, so they wanted to keep it off. But they also protected a ton of other timber from burning. But the point is, they told me it's better to fight fire at night, but we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, and that's what the smoke jumpers say, and the old line firefighters are upset. It's like you say, it's not the workers in the field; it's the policies that they're following, and seem to be to encourage wildfire, and they're very successful.
I'm doing a story for this on this IVM. It's the vegetation management program that the BLM has, and they put this together. It's scientific. They put it out on sales to go in and thin them. And then the anti-timber groups take it to court, hold it up in court. You have a judge who knows nothing about timber management. And he's a judge. And we have put the management of our forests in the hands of courtrooms and judges and anti-timber people who don't know what they're doing. And I don't understand why we don't have people in Congress or somebody coming out and saying this is absolutely insanity.
In December of '69, the reason that people aren't coming out of Congress is most of them are lawyers. So on the same 1 or 2 day period in December 2022, 1969, we had Congress at the NEPA. And at the same time, about 50 lawyers on the other side of town in Washington, D.C., formed the Environmental Law Institute. So that Law Institute and NEPA were created on the same day for the same purpose, lawyers setting laws that other lawyers could use. And that's skyrocketed as they started adding details, endangered species for them to work with, and then the Equal Access to Justice Act. Just set the stage for what we have now. Massive wildfires, bankrupt rural communities. I think Paradise might be burning again. And these things are all predictable. They have been predicted. They were avoidable. Local people putting out the fires is what's happened for 10,000 years. This is all new, where we have a central government telling us that we can't work in the woods. We can't harvest the materials. And when they start burning predictably, we have to just sit back and watch.
So we are the gold standard for timber production, meaning we do it better and more environmentally sensitive, watching riparian zones, caring for streams. We do it better than anyone in the world. The rest of the world looks at us and thinks, how do we could never make a living doing that. And yet, so here, if you're really an environmentalist and you look at this, you'd say, okay, so we want to buy local. We don't want to be shipping timber because that costs fuel. So that's putting carbon in the air to bring the timber from China and from Russia, which is where we're buying it. And so we limit what we can do right here in our backyard, grow local, shop local, you put local people to work. And we're willing to go across the world to pay more for timber, bring it over here and harvest it. And we smile and pat ourselves on the ass and say, look at us. We're so environmental and we're not destroying our forests. When instead you could be managing your forest, using the products that are here and sustainable, green, solar powered product, the best housing product, the most sustainable housing product you can find. But we're going to Russia and China and we go like this. Wash our hands of it and walk away. And that's so freaking hypocritical.
We're not the gold standard anymore. We're burning up our forests, polluting the air. When we had the Labor Day fires, we had the worst air in Portland and Medford in the world. And our pollution went around the globe. Our businesses are going broke. We just had another sawmill close in John Day. So the roads are being degraded. So there's no way we're a gold standard, and you're leaving Canada off this list. It's ridiculous that it's ridiculous that we're, excuse me here.
You're fine.
It's ridiculous that we're importing wood at all in Oregon. The Douglas fir region used to be the richest timber growing region in the world. And now we are the largest wildfires in the world.
Well, we also have that wonderful habitat conservation plan that former Governor Brown came up with to try to lock up the forests, and that's closed mills and logging operations, especially in Clatsop and up in the northern part of Oregon. But it's affected the whole state, hasn't it?
The habitat conservation plans are now on 3 different fronts. Those are federal regulations requiring federal monitoring of streams and wildlife in Oregon. So we've got the private forest, which is the HCP, the federal regulations on our private lands. In Clatsop, we've got the Oregon Department of Forestry, so that's a conservation plan on our lands. And then the Elliott State Forest moved from Department of Forest Management, so it's got a third HCP going. So we've got HCPs that have been going on since 1996, and it's just now through you and Jen Hamaker and organizations, it's only been a couple years that the public's even heard about these. But they're a federal takeover of our streams that aren't and our timberlands life that are along riparian areas.
So, Bob, let's talk solutions, and we can dream a little if we want to, because we could let's assume that we the people actually, started being we the people, and we started, really caring about true sustainability, true environmentalism, true community connection, and go back to some of that. It's not. And get rid of the narrative that we're destroying. I mean, most people I know, and even anti-timber people, it's funny, Bob, they live in these houses that are made out of timber. It's the damnedest thing. 2x6s and 2x4s. And I don't see them giving those up. And they haven't gone to a mud house, which in Oregon, I'd love to see them going to a mud house. Let's have a rainstorm and see what happens. But they're depending on timber for their products, but not in my backyard or something. But what could we do? What are some of the positive? You guys are working on plans. You're throwing out information. Obviously, educating people is super important to understand. I still have friends, and they'll still say, yeah, but the streams are getting ruined, and this is happening, and this is happening. And it's like, but you've got to look at big picture.
I think it's mostly federal land. The road closures are bad. So, but mainly it's contracting. And it doesn't matter if it's contracting for reforestation workers, where the feds in the 1980s went over basically to migrant crews with illegals underbidding local businesses that destroyed the reforestation industry. And then that has gone into the federal lands where they stop timber sales. And like you say, it's people that claim to be environmentalists that are living in wood homes. We don't use wood heat so much anymore. They use paper products still. There's lots and lots of materials that are required from wood, and to be importing those and saying that we're saving carbon in our forests and letting them burn is not only hypocritical, it's just outright stupid. It doesn't add up. You can't pencil it out. So
it's bullshit. It's total bullshit.
Yep.
I'll say it. They're little Starbucks cups, those little cups, those things, those are made out of wood. They're toothpaste. Okay, so maybe every environmentalist person that thinks they're environmentalist and is against the timber industry should stop using toothpaste, stop using their Starbucks cups, get out of their house and live in a tent. Or they could build a steel framed building, which causes much more carbon to go into the environment. So, that would be hypocritical too. So, but what do we do legislatively, Bob? What can people do in the state? You have to pay attention to who you're voting into power, because these folks have beautiful, wonderful, dreamy ideas, but they don't pan out, and they're hypocritical.
I'm not so sure they have any ideas. I think a lot of it in Oregon is the I-5 Democrats that have moved up, and we were warned about this in Portland and Salem. and they're urban people, and they have political power, and they have the capability to do these things. So Kate Brown, that you mentioned, when she started putting in the HCPs, the environmentalists sued the Elliott. The Elliott had been producing hundreds of dollars for the Common School Fund. It had provided 500 local jobs for. And then they said, oh, well, they filed suit against us, so we got to shut it down and get an HCP. Well, an HCP is a federal pass that says, well, we can log as well as manage for wildlife. So that's been going on now. There's been no logging going on. 400 jobs have been lost. Our schools have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And Kate Brown, they didn't even appeal that ruling. And instead, they had the taxpayers vote to $220 million of their own money to get rid of, theoretically, obligation to the Common School Fund that the Elliott had been created for in 1930. So the whole thing seems to be political. The way to reverse it in Oregon would be to challenge environmentalists and using scientific facts, not judges that are like Sierra Club claims. I mean, we've got Cascadia Wild was one of the filed suit, and you look at their website and they'll say there's over 400,000 acres or 40,000 acres of old growth on the Elliott. And that's, to use the scientific term, bullshit. It's ridiculous. The whole Elliott, it's all, there's less than 1% old growth. So the fact that they're claiming that there's critical habitat for marbled murrelets, for spotted owls, and it's more valuable to the public for those reasons is just fabrication. They're just flat out inventing lies, convincing the urban voters that these are serious problems, that they got to save carbon in our forests, and the fact that they're burning up and the carbon's going in the air is because of climate change. Got to do even less work, and we've got it's crazy. But the part to me crazy is how they can keep getting away with this. It's been going on 35 years, and it should have been obvious to everybody 20 years ago that no, this isn't working. These people don't know what they're talking about. But it's still working. They still make things up. People are still voting them into office.
Well, and it's all messaging. They've created a message where everybody, you know, we in the West have a love affair with timber. We love our forests, but we're loving them to death because it's like bad parents. You know, if you have a kid nobody else likes, are you a good parent? You probably didn't tell the kid, no, stop it. And so we've got the same situation with this. I want to revisit just a teeny bit here, just so people really get this, to reiterate. The Elliott State Forest belonged to us. Well, when I was an Oregonian, the people of Oregon. And it was designed to produce timber off of, and, you know, not, I mean, to do both. It was to take care of this forest. And the money from that then went into the school fund. So the same people who are trying to sell and hand over the Elliott Forest to OSU, who didn't they give it back? Didn't that all not work out?
OSU, after 4 or 5 years, and I'm reviewing their plan right now, between the dean, DeLuca, he realized this whole thing that they're doing is a racket. They're trying to sell carbon credits, and there's 2 or 3 or 5 people behind the scenes that are benefiting by that. So they backed out. The president of Oregon State last November wrote a letter and said, yes, and it is good. It would have been a total embarrassment. The articles I've been writing on it, I think I've written 3 now over the last 5 years, calling the Elliott plan a boondoggle, and it's documented. They're spending millions of dollars on a couple of environmental lawyers. They're having a bunch of meetings, and nobody's working. 2 guys are maintaining the main road system for the last 8 years, and 400 or 500 people are sitting on their hands and they're waiting for it to burn up again.
Well, Bobby, here's the thing though, too, is that so that money's supposed to from the harvest, which isn't happening, went to the school fund. And so then the very legislators that agree with this, and the governor who agrees with this, then sit and whimper and whine because Oregon doesn't have enough money for its schools. and it's doing a terrible job of educating kids. They're not even getting educated. So you've got this source of money that they give up and they go, we know we need more money. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. Okay, so let's talk about the carbon tax thing. What the biggest bunch of BS I've ever heard in my life is this carbon credit. It's like, okay, so I know of a company that it puts money into this group, and I'm going to keep it real vague here, but into a group, and then they go out to cattle farmers and cattle ranchers, excuse me, and they get them to do different kinds of techniques with cattle ranching that are more sustainable and all that kind of stuff. So they have fewer cattle, but these companies, like let's say, Company Z, they're putting money into that. And then even though their company isn't carbon zero, they can claim it that we are a carbon neutral. We put no carbon into the environment because we're paying off this farmer not to have as many cattle as he would have normally. And so then I get to claim that I'm carbon free, and it's all bullshit.
It's a racket that grew out of this. They just had 11,000 acres burn up in Northern California that was a carbon credit racket. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, you can continue polluting, but what we'll do is we'll take another area over here that would theoretically produce carbon, and we will reserve it. And so they're taking forests, which are dynamic, and they're saying, okay, now they're storing carbon. So that's what they're trying to do with the Elliott. They're trying to say, oh, okay, logging, it's critical habitat for endangered species, which is bullshit. And so we're going to sell these credits. So instead of pulling in 20 million or 25 million a year for the schools and similar amounts into the local communities and 100 local families, we're going to have a few investors make about $1 million a year. It's crazy. It doesn't add up. And then what happens is the trees get bugs, or they rot, or they burn up, or they blow over. Like the Columbus Day storm in 1962 blew over 100 million feet on the Elliott, a 70-year-old second growth, which took 2 or 3 years to salvage. But more importantly, that happened on a Friday. I can remember it real well. I was in high school in Portland. And by Monday, Bill Higginstein, representing the industry, and people representing the Forest Service and State Department of Forestry had a salvage plan in place. 72 hours. Wow. And thousands of people went to work. Self-loading log trucks were invented to cover the action and cleaned up the forest. And we didn't have any residual fire because we had people working in the woods, knew what they were doing, faced with the situation, and they handled it. Now, still from the 87 silver crisis, burnt 3 more times just because they didn't harvest it, they didn't salvage it, they didn't manage the land, they shut down the roads. They're doing everything they can. I think a joke I've been making for a lot of years, it's not funny anymore, is I used to say if the North Koreans or the Russians or the Chinese were trying to destroy the industries of the Pacific Northwest by destroying our forests, like the Japanese tried in World War II with fire bombs, they couldn't do any better job than DC is doing.
Yeah,
it's not a joke anymore. The 2020 Labor Day fires, and then followed up with the crap reforestation work they were doing afterwards. And they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars having people from other countries that aren't even here legally, a lot of them, plant really shoddy trees underneath standing snags without preparing the sites. Those are not things we were doing in the 70s and 80s when we were doing good reforestation work, and we were doing it a lot cheaper, a lot better. It's discouraging to look at in lots of ways. It's hard to believe that it continues to go on, and it's created just massive billions and billions of dollars worth of damage to our region.
Well, when you go back to the Elliott too, so the interesting thing you're saying with these carbon credits. So you're giving up 20, $25 million for schools, plus all the money that went into the local communities, and you're trading it for virtue signaling to a bunch of
Yep.
rich people who want to look to their friends like they're doing the right thing for the environment, and lying about their carbon, how much they really put carbon into the air. And so they're paying off our what is Oregon owned land and timber. They're taking it from you and taking money to give to people who don't need the money. It's absolutely
Yep.
repulsive. Now,
Repulsive. Is a good word.
yeah. Now go to what is it that you guys are working on with your group when you guys are putting this information out? What is your goal? I mean, how can people out here listening to this and watching this interview, what can we start doing as Oregonians, Montanans, as Washingtonians, as Idahoans, and Californians? What do we start doing? What are things we can do, Bob?
Well, I think on a practical basis on the Elliott, one of my associates, Dave Sullivan, is a retired business professor from Oregon State, has filed lawsuits against the state for mismanagement of the Elliott, with the idea that the Common School Fund needs to have funding. So lawsuits are one action, but lawyers are really expensive. You said voting. The people need to be told if they're federal, that the Equal Access to Justice Act is a joke. The Endangered Species Act is totally out of control, and we need to start looking at those laws specifically. We could shut down access to taxpayer funding to the nonprofits would be a good starting point. We need to salvage these dead areas ASAP. Salvage should, once the fire goes out, salvage sales should start within 72 hours, or if it's the government, a month.
Because you got to get out of there in a year. You really have a year to get the good stuff out, right? Because the bugs come in and start eating
it. If it's cedar, you got 100 years. Large diameter stuff, probably 2 or 3 or 5 years. But yeah, usually about a year you start having bug problems. And on the Elliott, you've got to sign a contract for these credits for 80 or 100 years. And it will blow over like the Columbus Day storm, or will burn up like the 1879 fire, or there'll be landslides like 1996 floods. We know these things will happen. And at those points, the money that you've been paid for the carbon credits has to be reimbursed. So it's ridiculous gain for, like you say, a handful of investors. Quite often they're polluters, so they're polluting in some area and they're buying carbon credits for another area, so they're allowed to continue polluting. So it doesn't get rid of that. And then when it's carbon credits in the forests are dynamic, so it's just an ephemeral effect. At some point, the trees are going to start dying if you don't manage them or take care of them. They'll burn up like they've been doing. And then like the 11,000 acres that the Portland firm sold carbon credits on in Northern California, now it's all standing snags. And not only did all the carbon go in the air, or most of it, the rest of it is in the trees that are going to be rotting now. So what are they going to do? Are they going to salvage it and turn it into products that won't rot so fast? Or are they just going to pay all the penalties for having their carbon credit scheme burn up?
What do you say?
A real interesting situation.
What do you say to people when they say, well, we just need to let Mother Nature take care of it?
I usually don't talk to them very long because they don't know what they're talking about. There is no Mother Nature, for goodness sakes. And the people that don't think that a healthy forest has a healthy human population don't know their history. There's been people living in these woods for thousands of years, doing prescribed burning, gathering firewood, keeping trails open, developing them as more recent times into roads and 2x4s instead of split planks. But the fact that we've abandoned these lands and they're selling this hail, Mother Nature will take care of it. And then you say, no, she won't. There's no Mother Nature. The forest will burn up because they're fuel. That's what nature will do. And when they burn up, they say, oh, well, we were still correct. Our models were still correct. but climate change is causing these exacerbations. And so that's our existential threat. So now we have to change light bulbs, and that will fix the forest. The whole thing is just nuts, and it's a house of cards. And why it hasn't
So
collapsed
what
decades ago, I still don't understand.
I have this idea, and just a feeling, and I don't know, and I feel like people are ready to learn. I think with everything going on, not just to timber, but culturally, we're understanding that we are being lied to, and that's when something smells like poop, like my grandpa used to tell me, when something smells like shit, it probably is. And I think we're starting to figure
No.
that out. That wait a second, if this is a carbon storing tree and it's storing carbon, and then you burn it, it releases that carbon. That's a bad thing. When you build it and put it in a 2x4 and put it in the wall of my home now becomes a carbon sequestering solution to the environmental problem we have. So if people could start looking at it that way, we're actually saving trees, we're saving forests by using them in wood products and things that we have that are storing that carbon. When we let them burn and rot, that puts that carbon back into the air. So if these people are really that concerned about carbon and sequestering it, why are they doing this with the forest? That's the best machine they've got going.
It's well, I'd go back to the point where you first said, why are we managing a forest for carbon? That's like managing the ocean for salt. Carbon is a building block of life. It's critical. CO2, the more CO2 we have, the more food we have, the healthier things are. They put extra carbon in the greenhouses to make things grow better. We say the carbon is going up and our forests are expanding. So starting off with the predicate that carbon is a pollutant, it's idiotic. I don't know how they're able to do that. It's not a pollutant. So managing a forest for carbon doesn't pencil out. It's a brand new concept. Our forests are burning up, then they're rotting. It's time that people just wised up and realized they've been sold a bill of goods.
Well, I was
and I think you're right. I think things are changing. I think the turning point was Oregon State in November when they said, hey, we're backing out of this. It's not penciling out. These carbon credits are not a good thing. This limitation on how much we can harvest a year doesn't in a dynamic for us. So I think that could have been a turning point. And I think you're right. I think people are starting to pay attention to what's been going on.
Well, I heard a report the other day, and I can't give you figures, but they said the Earth has actually become more productive and greener over the last 50 years. And they and this was in deserts, like deserts are being more productive, and it was because of there's more carbon in the air. And people, so they've been selling the story, but the problem is the general public fails to do their homework. And when you say, oh, the poor owl, it's losing its habitat, and the trees and all this, and then people, their heart hurts, and they watch a Disney movie and see that trees can talk, and that the animals have voices and personalities too, and they are scared of this thing, and everybody falls for this rather than going, what about the community in the little town of Oak Ridge where everything is falling apart and people aren't showing up, and they have to leave and move, and everything they've built for hundreds of years is now gone? Is that not a sad enough story because they don't have cute fuzzy little ears like a deer and Bambi? I mean, we're suckers for this stuff, and it's like people have to get away from this. And I think that they're ready to be educated, and they're starting to listen, because when you spend your summer in Oregon or Montana or Washington, and you're now planning your vacation around the smoke-filled months, I think it starts hitting home. Here's the thing that also bothers me though, Bob. The timber industry did a survey in the summer about smoke and timber. Do we need more management? Everybody was, yeah. Did the same study in December. Nobody gave a shit. Nobody nobody, not anybody's radar. It's not, since it's not a problem right now. And this is a problem. The problem is these forests is what I'm hearing. And you tell me, you're the expert. They're almost to a place where to restore what we've done, we've allowed to happen, is going to take generations to get this back to what it was, because we've created such a cluster screw.
We could probably do it in 10 or 15 years if we had the fortitude and the laws, but we don't. So you're right. And I think one thing that people aren't getting, they were told the idea that carbon's a pollutant. You and I, when we were in school, they taught us correctly. No, it's a building block of life. It's the exact opposite of a pollutant. It's a good thing. But I think the fuzzy little owl story is now they've got the barred owls. They're going to kill 500,000 of them. Taxpayers are going to pay for it. They're systematically slaughtering owls, and I gave presentations. This caused a fair amount of controversy and probably caused unemployment in my life. But I gave presentations to the grad students at Oregon State in forestry, and then about a month later in fish and wildlife. So I was talking to the faculty, the staff, the grad students, probably 40, 50 in each thing. And I brought up Darwin's definition of race, which is a species that grows in different areas and has different characteristics. And then I think early 40s, what we were taught was if different would breed young, then they were the same species. So now we've got, so what I did that was controversial, I said, okay, here's a barred owl, here's a spotted owl. They have a variation in their vocalization. They say there's a slight variation in their diet. Their plumage is slightly different. One's hot flashes. So, and we're told that the endangered species is the spotted one, and the surplus species that we got to systematically slaughter now is the bad one. So I compared those two animals to a pygmy and a Swede. I said, okay, wait a minute. Here we got vocalization, we got physiology, preferred habitat, we got preferred diet, and we don't have any evidence of viable young, and yet we're the same species. We're all human beings. These are the same species. They're an owl. They're a brown-eyed owl, the most common owl in North America. We used to call them hoot owls, but because we had a race develop in isolation here in the Northwest that have spots instead of bars, and now we have to do this racial purity project with taxpayer dollars to kill 500,000 owls that have no reason. All they did was move into the area, and they're having sex with the spotted owls, and they're having viable young. They're birds of a feather, and yet we have this ridiculous environmental, with quotes around it, groups hiring lawyers to combat these intruders. It's the whole thing is you look at it from a distance and it's stupid.
Well, I remember when they discovered that the barred owl was actually threatening the spotted owl. And in the news business, we did hundreds of hours of stories on the spotted owl and what it did, and Clinton coming out and all this. When it came out that the barred owl was part of the problem, it was like a little teeny mention on the news. It wasn't blown up or said, hey, we were wrong. It's not just old growth. It's not just second growth timber. It's not this habitat. It's also this owl coming in. And oh, everybody's quiet. And now they turn around and they're going to slaughter this owl. And I remember going out on a story, Bob, and with the scientists about the spotted owl. They were talking about this owl, and they gave me a mouse, a live mouse, and I held it up in the woods, not a trained owl, and that owl took that mouse out of my hand. And I looked at them and I said, this is not an animal that's going to survive, because what animal is going to come that close to a human being and take a mouse out of his hand? I mean, just intellectually, you're going, okay, this is like, you should have some fear. You should have, as a wild animal, that you're going to do that. And it wasn't like they trained it and whistled at it. But we keep getting in the way of stuff. It's like what they're doing to the grizzly bear here in Montana. We have too many, and they're mean and they kill people. And even when they killed a guy,
Yep.
because the guy they think might have done something to agitate the bear, they didn't kill the bear. So the bear had more rights than the dead guy.
Wow.
And it's like, so you've got too many, and then you got billboards, in Helena that say, "Oh, protect the grizzlies." Well, yeah, wait till you're out there on a trail with your bear spray and your gun, and you don't see the bear, and he comes and mauls you. So then, you just kind of lost your messaging. But we get in the way of this stuff. Once they're back, and because they said, I can't remember how many they said they wanted to get back, but we're way over that number. And now they still want to protect it. And it's just unbelievable how we respond to stuff. Bob, how do people get in touch with you guys and your group? If there's folks out there who've watched this and have said, I want to get involved in this. I want to get more information, because I think people have a hard time. Where do I get information? From the news? No, because they're spewing out whatever the rhetoric of the day is. And people really want to get facts-based information. So how can they find you and your group?
Well, for the last 25 or 26 years, we've had a nonprofit, 501c3, Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project. We've been working with grade school students, college students, local experts, doing oral histories. We've got thousands of PDF files online. So one thing that I've proven is fundraising, but nonprofit, it's a nonprofit. And so we have had donations to our organization, and we've been fairly successful. This conversation we're having is one aspect of that. But through 25 years, as you know, people have wanted to listen to the environmentalists, have wanted to listen to the propaganda, and have not wanted to listen to the facts. So we've been working with school kids and small groups, and I think it's on the Elliott, it's starting to have an effect. I think Oregon State took them 8 years, but we've been working there about 8 or 10 years with the kids there. And unfortunately, most of the people I've worked with through the years are no longer with us. We've been working on these things for 25 and 30 years. I'm 75, and they used to call me young man, and they meant it. So I think Oregon Websites is one way, but dealing with the local politicians and telling them that we need to go back to work. The federal lands need to start making timber sales and contracts with local businesses and people, not low bid 2-week fly-by-night outfits like they've been doing for 20 or 30 years. We need to have an industry back in our rural areas, and we need to keep our roads and trails open. So probably politically is the best shot. And if they want to help us out, ORWW, it's online. They can send me an email, and we will gladly accept donations and put it to good use.
All right. Bob, thank you for what you've done all these years. It takes a long time to sway a message. And I think people are finally starting to, when it starts impacting your world and your life the way it is right now, I think people get real open to something that's called the truth. And it's not your personal truth or what somebody believes to be the truth. There is a truth. And when there's a reaction for every action, and we have reacted and reacted and reacted. And now I think people are ready to go, okay, what do we do? And I think all the groundwork you've laid over all those years, and those people you're still working with, and the ones that you worked with that are gone, it's not for naught. I mean, it has value. And I think you've laid the foundation. Now people come in and go, what can we do? And the information's there. So thank you for what you did for Oregon.
Oh, thanks for that. Fire is really critical. When we have these fires and the smoke, people are paying close attention. They want to do something. They want to help. As soon as the fall rains come out, they forget about it, and they start planning for Thanksgiving dinner or something, and it goes dead. And it's a year-round problem, and people need to become more aware. And I think you're right. I think with your program and Jen Hamaker's group and our efforts, finally things may be turning around.
All right, Bob, thank you for spending your time with me. I really do appreciate it. We'll have you back for sure. Okay, I'll see you later.
Sounds good. Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
I have too. You betcha. Thank you. All right, so that's Bob. So couple things. I want to clear up one thing. So when I was talking about firefighting has become an industry, it has. I am not putting down the firefighters for working their hours. They don't control how this works. This is something that's set up. This is a mindset at the top, at the federal level and the state level, and they're doing their jobs and doing that. So I don't want anybody taking that and trying to twist that around to make it so that I'm saying that they're not doing their job and not working. That is not what I'm saying. Second thing is, if you heard this conversation, you think, oh, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, somebody should do something about that. Well, stop yourself right there. These are your forests. I mean, they really are. They're called public lands. And you've got people using your forests to sell carbon taxes credits to rich people so they can feel good about themselves when that money, way more money, could be dumped into your child's education. Now, you should give a damn about that. I mean, that's a big deal when you've got groups and using, as Bob was saying, using the system and going in and when a system set up for poor people and for people who are underprivileged, and they're using that system to go in and fight. So they're using your money in your program to fight timber sales and to lock down the forest. If you agree with that, you may not be so upset, but the rest of you who do not agree with that, they're using your money to do their dirty work. That should piss you off a lot. So you can allow the world to run over you, or you can pick it up and say, no more. And you know how you start by doing that? With your voice. God gave you a voice for a reason. Now use it. And if you're afraid of how people are going to respond, too bad. It's too late for that. You can't be a wuss. You got to stand up and fight for your state. I get a lot of people going, oh, you left Oregon. You don't love Oregon. We love Oregon. If you love Oregon and you love Washington and I love Montana and Idaho, then we need to fight for this stuff and for those communities, not just read the headline and say, oh, look at all those people that lost their job. Oh, well, I still have mine. That's not how it works. And we're going back to that, those old ways. And we can manage these forests. We really can. But what we got to do is use the science and get rid of the courtroom as our forest manager. We got great people in the Forest Service and the BLM who are foresters and know how to take care of the land. They know what needs to be done, and they can't do it because these people are using your money to lock up your forests. That is what's wrong. I'm Rick Dancer. This is Get Real with Rick Dancer. Now, please go do something about it. Good night.